Welcome, everyone. We're going to give people another minute or two to join, and then we'll get started, all right? And as you're coming in, please take an opportunity to tell us where you're coming from. You can either, you can quickly just use the chat to tell us where you're coming from. Hi, everyone, as you're coming in. Really excited for you to be here. We're just going to give one more minute for anyone else to join. And while you are waiting, if you can just share where you're joining us from using the chat, that would be great. All right, we need 30 more seconds as everyone trickles in. And again, if you can use the chat to just tell thank you, Bellows Falls from Vermont. We see somebody from Jersey, somebody from Texas. Love it. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to our August webinar. It's called Reculturing September, Building a Better Back to School. So welcome everyone. If you just joined, please tell us where you're joining from. All right. My name is Dhara Patel. I'm really glad that you're here with us. I've spent the last 14 years working in the field of education in multiple capacities. And at Inspired Instruction, I partner with administrators to think through their priorities and become a thought partner in providing support. I'm really excited to spend this time with you today because this is a challenge that we're seeing across many schools right now. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about what it looks like in your schools and how we can help. So, again, as you're settling in, please share in the chat where you're joining us from. And we're going to get started now. So, our commitment here at Inspired Instruction, we work alongside educators to turn new learning into something that actually works in the classroom and makes a difference for the students. Everything that we'll be sharing today comes from our experience when partnering with schools and seeing what truly sticks in practice. I truly apologize. I just realized I wasn't sharing my screen, so I'm going to start doing that right now. So I hope you're able to see my screen now, and I do apologize. Unfortunately, nobody let me know that you were unable to see my screen. So I will go ahead and start again. Hi, everyone. My name is Dara, and today we're going to be talking about Reculturing September, Building a Better Back to Future. And again, I spent my last 14 years in the field of education in multiple capacities. I had Inspired Instruction. I partner with administrators to think through their priorities, and then we become a thought partner in providing that support. And I'm really excited to spend this time with you today because we understand it's a challenge that we're seeing across many schools. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about what it looks like in your schools and how we can help. So again, if you haven't done so, please let us know when you're joining, where you're joining us from. All right, so at Inspired Instruction, We work alongside educators and to turn new learning, excuse me, into something that actually works in the classrooms and makes a difference for their students. Everything that we'll be sharing today comes from our experience partnering with schools and really seeing what truly sticks in practice. So, what are we seeing across schools right now, right? What we're seeing is school leaders want to start the year with positive energy. But first days can come really quickly, right? And they can really get consumed by procedures and logistics, right? And really can overshadow that positive energy because you're really thinking about that compliance, right? If you're thinking about the educators, the teachers, right? They're really coming in with this urgency, this academic urgency, right? And they're really thinking about maybe their test scores, if they're in testing grades, right? They want their students to feel connected and engaged from day one, but really making sure that how did they do on their test, on their state test the year before, right? Setting up their classrooms, like all of that kind of pushes that relationship, right? And that community building almost to the side because they want to deep dive into the academics, right? And school teams, right? Everybody walks into September with different priorities and expectations, right? School leaders want everyone working towards a shared vision, but staff may enter September with different priorities or expectations, right? Or ideas about what matters most. So by the end of the session today, you are going to be able to, one, identify ways to prioritize relationships and positive energy from day one, right? So I'm talking about when you get your staff back in school, that first week of training for many of you guys, right? Use strategies to build engagement before procedures and data and compliance, right? And build staff alignment around a shared why and school-wide values. Okay. So we know September comes with a lot of competing demands, right? And as leaders, it's very easy for urgent things to take over, right? But I want to invite you to think about September a little differently. Okay. It's September isn't just a launch, right? It's a culture building opportunity. Think about what your teachers are going to experience when they return, right? Like your first faculty meeting, your opening message, how the decisions are made, right? How much voice are people going to have? Those experiences really communicate what matters, right? So if you want your students to feel communicated, to be engaged, right? To be heard, valued, we really have to ask ourselves, right? Are teachers experiencing those same things as members of the school community? And that's the leadership shift that I want you to consider, right? Because remember, what your teachers experience, it's really going to influence how they approach their work, how they teach their kids, right? How they teach the students, how they approach problems. And that's ultimately going to influence what the students experience, right? So again, not just what information do my teachers need, but what do you want your teachers to experience in September? And how can you intentionally create that experience for them, right? So for a second, think about your own staff and your school. And there isn't one right answer. And once you start thinking about this experience you want the teachers to have, Let's look at one structure that you already have that can help create that experience. And that is your faculty meeting, your very first faculty meeting. That's where the shift can become practical, right? Faculty meetings don't have to be simply a place where information is delivered, right? They can also be the places and time where your teachers experience the culture that you're asking them to then create in their classrooms, right? So again, if you want the students to have that experience of belonging, right? That voice, the engagement, right? The collaboration, that purpose, then let's make sure that your teachers understand the purpose behind the work that we're asking them to do, right? And how you can be modeling it for your staff. So, what might that actually look like when your teachers walk into that first faculty meeting? So, let's talk about that. So, imagine your first faculty meeting, okay? You can open with, here are the things we need to cover, right? Simple. But I challenge you. What if you started with one of these below? Once this one or the next one. And you give your staff a few minutes to kind of process it and then talk with each other, right? What have you just created? I'll give you about 15 seconds to just think to yourself. By doing those questions that I just posted, the 2 questions, and they're not the only questions, right? Just think to yourself, what shift has already happened? What have you created for your staff? Go ahead and take 15 seconds to think about it. And if you would like to share in the chat, please feel free to do so. I'm hoping you were able to say that you gave your staff a voice, right? And connected the staff to a shared purpose, right? You're not just asking them about their opinion, you're beginning a shared conversation about the experience that you want to create for the students. And there's something else happening in that moment that's really important, right? And that is, and you might already be picking it up, that your teachers are actually experiencing the very things, right? Those meaningful experience that you're asking them to then create for their students, right? That voice, that participation, right? You're giving them that engagement. You're having them collaborate. You're giving them that purpose. And that's the idea I want you to hold on to as we continue. Because culture is not just something we tell people about, right? Is something that we experience, is something that your teachers experience. If you want that buy-in, they need to have that experience. So let's pause and think about your own setting, all right? Think about your next faculty meeting. What do you want teachers to experience? Maybe it's connection, maybe it's voice because you feel like their experience matters, right? Or maybe it's just simply positive energy, right? Just choose one. And then think about one small change you could make to intentionally create that experience. And I'll give you about 15 seconds. And if you're comfortable, please put that word in the chat. You could just write, I would focus on energy, where there's choice. Go ahead, I'll give you 15 seconds. Thank you, Angelica. You said connection. Yes. Right. That's what you want them to experience, right? And to bring us to a deeper question, yes, Douglas, thank you. You also want them to have that connection. What is that one small change you could make to create? So now think about it, right? What is that one change you can make so that way you're creating that connection for your teachers? Now that you identified it, think about that, right? And that brings us to that deeper question, right? That is, what happens when we move beyond creating a positive experience and begin building a belief that together we make a difference for our students? Thank you, Tracy, for sharing that collaboration. Right, so now let's talk about moving beyond just that positive experience, right? Now that you've realized what is that one thing you want to change, and how can you begin to build that belief that together we can make that difference, right? And so that brings us to collective efficacy, right? Because creating positive culture is important, but we really want to go deeper than people just having to feel good about themselves, right? It's not just about, it's more than that morale, right? Together, we can make a difference for our students. And that's collective efficacy, right? That your actions matter, practice matters, and our collective effort matters. That together as a team, we can achieve goals that can impact student success. So it's more than just saying we have a good team. It's the belief that, again, our action, our practice, and our collective effort is going to influence the student outcome. And that really becomes very important when our students are struggling, right? So instead of asking, why aren't these students successful? We begin asking, what can we do together to make a difference? And that's the shift from that individual responsibility to shared responsibility, right? And that's what I want us to think about as we're moving forward. And what does this actually sound like when a team has collective efficacy? So let's take a look at that next. So, collective efficacy, right, becomes visible in the language that we use, right? As I gave those examples in the earlier slide, what can we do together, right? Instead of I, we're going to we. Instead of that's your grade level, we hear how can we support these students together, right? What can we try? So I want you to think of your school team for a moment, okay? And I want you to look at that post-it that I have on the slide that says, when challenge arises in your school, does your team of teachers, administrators naturally move toward I or we? Think of a recent example. And there's no judgment here, right? And you don't need to put it in the chat or anything. Just simply want you to think, where does your team naturally progress, to I or to we? And I'll give you about 10 seconds. Think through examples you've had in the past school year. And if you are a brand new administrator, think about when you were a teacher. Did you naturally move towards I or did you go to we? Or if you're a teacher attending right now, do you go to I or do you go to we? Right? And now that you have this understanding, the next question is, especially for my leaders, what can we do, right? Or what can you do to help move those conversations towards we? So keep that question in mind as we look at some very practical examples next. So I'll give you a moment to go through these practical examples and how you as a leader can shape the conversation. And as a matter of fact, you don't even have to be a school leader. You could be a school teacher and still shape that conversation when talking to another colleague who may be in that I stage, right? And I'm hoping that you're able to see the shift in the conversation as you're going through these examples. If you can quickly give me, something in the chat, do you agree? So the goal isn't to ignore the challenge, right? It's to change the conversation around the challenge that your teachers are experiencing, right? So you can very easily use this tool. You can even share it with your teachers at a staff meeting to say, hey, if this is how we're talking, let's shift towards that we, right? This is a tool you can take with you and share with your teachers as well, because the idea is it's a team effort, right? Love it, Tracy. Positive ways to model collective efficacy with staff and then with students. Yes, reflection. It is absolutely necessary, right? Because we're not perfect, where things can go south you cannot predict, right? So reflection is one of the most positive ways to model. Thank you for sharing your thought. And please, as you are having thoughts, just share throughout the chat. Even if I'm talking, I do monitor it, so I will stop and acknowledge and share what you have to say in case somebody missed it in the chat. Okay. And I think, Tracy, you bring that point, right? Once you model it for your staff, then it's going to go to the students, right? And really, again, the goal is to not ignore the challenge, but rather change the conversation around the challenge, right? You are helping the teams think about what's within our influence, right? What can we do together? We can't control this, but what can we control, right? And these repeated conversations are really how effective efficacy becomes part of the culture. And now, if you're asking people to work together, right, we also need to be clear about what we are working towards together, right? And that's where the shared why comes in, right? So the shared why gives the team a common purpose, right? For how they work together and ultimately what they create for the students, right? So imagine it's your first or second faculty meeting of the year, right? You've welcomed everyone back. You address some of, fire drills, all that logistics, and now you really want to create a conversation about the kind of school community you're building together. Rather than the leadership, right, deciding what the school should value, I encourage you to invite the staff to identify what matters most to them and then look for this common value. So I'm going to share a tool with you, which will be shared with you later, okay? And it's the what's our why value, okay? And so all it is your teachers are given all these words, right? This is just a for reference purposes list of words, right? And they would pick of the five of those top five that they feel would be the value for the school, right? And then you can have your teachers go into groups and bring that down to three, and then possibly into one shared value as a school, right? And then you ask, if this is something we truly value as a school, what can each of us do to make it visible for the students, right? The question is important because now we're moving from value onto actions that we can take together, right? And that's what creates that shared ownership. So again, the important piece here that we can't leave without is that behavior. What does the value actually look like? So let's use one example and see what that can look like. So make that why observable, right? So let's say you did that activity that I just shared with your staff, right? And they came up with a shared value of belonging. So now the question is, if belonging were truly visible in your school, what might you actually see or hear? So I want you to take a second, and in the chat, I want you to put, if belonging was a shared value you just did with your staff, what might you actually see or hear? Take about 30 seconds to put an idea on the chat. So it could be something an administrator does, something a teacher's doing, something that the students are doing, but what would you physically see or hear to show that we see belonging in the school? Takes 15 seconds to put in the chat. And I'll read out some responses as they're coming through. And I know I already shared one example, so I'll keep that up there, right? So that used as an example, which is administrators doing walkthroughs, right? Many administrators, you do walkthroughs in the morning, you walk through the school, and you're greeting students by their name, right? So that shows the belonging is present in the school. Does anybody else share another example of how belonging could be seen or heard in a school? Yes. Having students to do a daily check-in, getting to know something about each student. Yes. When teachers do those surveys, right? Getting to know you. Yes. I'll give about 10, 15 more seconds in case if anybody wants to share. I'll go ahead and share a few more examples, right? Teacher uses think, pair, share. So every student has a chance to talk, right? Or you might notice students are working with different classmates throughout the week, right? Because teacher has done flexible grouping. So our goal is to create consistency, right, across the school. And when teachers experience the voice, the collaboration, right, the shared purpose during faculty meetings, we can then invite them to think about how can they take these practices, right? And how would they show up in their classroom? So now the faculty meeting, right, that I said something you do all the time, is now your starting point for a school-wide change. It's not an isolated event. From faculty meeting, now you start seeing it into the classrooms, and now it's a school-wide impact. So as leaders, you've got to keep asking, how do we take what we're experiencing together and make it something students experience throughout our school? And that's the connection between that faculty meeting and the larger culture that we're trying to create, right? And so one thing you can definitely do is once you have a faculty meeting, right? You ask your teachers, what did you just experience, right? And key question is, what made it effective? Because if it was effective and if it touched them, you know they're going to want to repeat it, right? And then how could you bring this experience into your classroom? So now, I know September is busy. So let's talk about how we can make this realistic and manageable, right? So in order for it to keep it manageable, right? Because there are procedures, there are logistics, there are initiatives, and there's lots of this other information that really needs to be communicated to your teachers. So we're not suggesting that change everything, right? But instead, we're talking about one intentional shift. Whether it's asking a question, right? Or you're giving teachers time to collaborate. Or maybe it's, Angelica, I see your question. If you're receiving, no, you're not going to receive a copy of the slides. However, the webinar is recorded and will be on our website by tomorrow morning, okay? And the tools that, the ones that I shared will be shared with you through email. Okay, and I hope that was helpful. All right. So going back, I want you to think about one, like for a moment, okay? And I want you to think about one shift that you can make in your next faculty meeting. And again, if you're not a leader, think about it as a teacher. What is that one intentional shift that you can make in that faculty meeting? And if you feel comfortable, just write it in the chat. And I will say it out loud. So if somebody's not monitoring the chat, they can at least hear somebody's encouraging collaboration. Love it, Brittany. Yes. And right, and just think about it. What is that going to look like? Right? Maybe you're starting with a question. I'll give it 10 more seconds if anybody else wants to add anything. No pressure at all. Right? So I hope what I really want you to notice is just you are not redesigning your faculty meeting, right? You're just thinking about one instructional shift. And to kind of help you, I just wanted to share a simple structure that you can actually use. And that's just, it's like a 10-10-10 faculty meeting check, right? And don't stick to the 10 minutes, okay? It's just an idea, right? So think about like that first 30 minutes of your faculty meeting, okay? And ask yourself, am I creating space for connection, engagement, and alignment? Or is my meeting mostly information, right? So again, the goal isn't to eliminate logistics. It's really to avoid letting logistics define the experience, right? Because at the beginning of the school year, we can get really good about this, right? Like, oh, let's connect, let's engage. And then as we go into the school year, that's when staff meetings can sometimes become very informative, right? So think of this not just as your recalibrating, reculturing September. I really want you to think about that the March meeting or January when state testing is, everyone's preparing for state testing, right? Just think about those. Like in as your faculty meetings are progressing, how are you connecting? How are you giving your teachers opportunities to engage? And how is it aligning to those shared value, right? And so this is a simply planning checklist, which I will show you in just a few minutes. And again, this checklist will be for you to keep, all right? And it will be shared with you after the webinar is over, all right? And again, the key is really want you to think intentionally that we talked about at the very beginning, right? What do I want my teachers to experience? And what am I going to do intentionally so they can experience that? And that's where this intention comes in, right? So our key takeaways is September really sets the tone, right? The experiences that we create really communicate what matters. Culture really starts with us. Before you ask teachers for a particular classroom experience, must model that experience with them. And third, collective efficacy, right? You want teachers to see themselves not just as individual responsible, right? For their individual classrooms. Right? Third grade, fourth grade, it's a whole team effort. And these are the resources that you are going to walk away with from the webinar. And I'm quickly just going to go through each so you know them, okay? And you will receive it. So one of them that I already mentioned, all of these I've actually mentioned, but so one is that faculty meeting questions that build culture, okay? So this is the one that we went at the very beginning where you talked about what kind of question can you ask at the beginning. So this tool actually doesn't just talk about at the beginning of the faculty meeting, you can even incorporate some of these at the middle of a faculty meeting or as they're leaving, right? Or as a reflection, like as you can see at the bottom, right? What is one thing we can do differently? What support do we need? So think of this as a guideline as you're doing, especially those consecutive faculty meetings. How can you encourage that culture building? How can you continue that? And what are some questions you can include in there? Right? You are then walking away with that leaders shape the conversation, right? This with those ideas that was encouraged. Feel free to share this with your teachers, right? The what's our why, right? And again, you're not limited to this list. You could get creative and have your teachers come up with other words that would be the shared value of the school. And then finally, the 10-10 faculty meeting check, right? Ask yourself, how will my staff experience belonging, right? How is my staff going to collaborate? And this is really just an idea for you and kind of like a checklist, a reminder as you're doing your consecutive faculty meetings. Mm-hmm. So these are really meant to be practical tools you can use, and these will be emailed to you in the next few days. So time for action, all right? So what is that one small shift that you plan to make as you lead your upcoming faculty meeting? So if you can take 30 seconds and tell me, in my next faculty meeting, I will and fill that in for me and write it in the chat. I would love to know. And I'll give us a minute. It doesn't have to be lengthy. It could be one word. It could be a phrase. What is that one thing that you're taking away? Beautiful. Love it, Brittany. I'm really makes me happy that you're able to use that tool right away when you leave the webinar. Yes. Love it, Tracy. Yes, that alignment piece, right? Shared value. If we're going to talk about value at the beginning of the school year, we got to keep revisiting it. Why are we doing this? How does this attach to our goals and values? Why is this important for our goals and values? The topic could be anything. Why is it still important for our goals or values? Otherwise, why are we talking about it, right? Love it, Tracy. All right, I think if you have more ideas, please go ahead and put it in the chat as we're, wrapping up the webinar. And so last but not least, really thank you, right? We know that meaningful change in classrooms and schools doesn't come up from one session, right? It really comes from trying something, right? And reflecting on it and continuing to refine over time. And as you leave today, we hope that you walk away with one idea that you really feel ready to try. And if any questions come up, or you want to think more deeply about what this could look like in your setting, we're always here as a thought partner, and we'll be glad to continue the conversation whenever it's helpful. And if you can, please, as usual, we love your feedback. If you can either take out your phones and scan that QR code. If not, I will share the sorry, I'm blanking out. I will share the link to the survey in the chat. And if you can please fill it out, I would really appreciate that. And Douglas, I see you have a question here. Will I share the slide deck? I would not be sharing the slide deck. However, this webinar will be available for you starting tomorrow, I believe, on the website. It will be uploaded on the website. And then the tools that I reviewed, the resources handout, will be emailed to you in the next few days. Thank you, Christine. I'm really glad that you found the webinar to be informative. That's our ultimate goal. So again, if you can either use your phone to scan the QR code, or you can use that link that I just posted in the chat for giving us a feedback, we'd greatly appreciate it. Absolutely, Angelica. I hope it was helpful. And if you have any questions, or if you want to, I'm here and to answer any questions you may have. But otherwise, thank you again for joining us today. And again, I'll stick around if anybody has a question or two. Please feel free to use the chat. I'm going to leave the slide up in case, if you want to use your phones to use the QR code, or you can use the link in the chat to leave us the feedback. And Tracy, that is really important. That because it is the foundation of, right? That's the belonging. You have to feel like you belong somewhere in order to even move forward, right? So thank you for sharing that. And I hope you were able to find the tools we shared and the when we thought partnered right now, help you process through that and make those changes in your school. All right. Thank you everybody for attending, and I look forward to seeing you again on the webinar. Have a great day. Bye-bye.